Without economic development, any potential for political openness and freedom will be questionable. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. Our topic of discussion today is the state of the country's economy. Where is the fuel price formula which was to be tabled in Parliament last year? Where is foreign direct investments? We see a lot of investment forums taking place and being held and organized in Colombo, but what value has it created to the country? What is happening to the stock market of Sri Lanka? Is it in limbo? Is your money safe? To discuss all this and more, including the depreciation of the rupee of this island nation, we have three guests in the studios this evening. Let me introduce them to you. Joining us this evening for the second time on the show is Shiran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. Nice to have you on the show, Shiran.
Pleasure to be back.
Nice to have you as well, Dr. W.A. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Nice to have you on board, Doctor. How are things? Things are progressing well?
Well, I think so.
So we are looking forward to drilling Dr. Jayawardena tonight on the show. Also joining us this evening for the first time is Dhanushka Samarasinghe, Head of Research, SoftLogic stock brokering firm. Thank you very much, Dhanushka, for joining us this evening. So let's start off tonight's show with Dr. W.A. Jayawardena, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. A few days ago, Dr. Jayawardena, you made a statement at an event in Colombo when you were introducing to give a brief introduction about the country's economy. The individual asked you whether the country's economy is in a crisis. You opened your statement stating, I want to add something else to it. It is in a deep crisis. What is the reason for this, Dr. Jayawardena?
Samir, the particular economic downturn that we are experiencing today, it started in year 2012 as I have mentioned on so many occasions, when we started to experience a slowdown in economic growth, slow growth in exports, then the expansion of the trade deficit, pressure for exchange rate to depreciate, and the inflation was rising up, and all these problems were faced by Sri Lanka economy as from year 2012. What has happened today is that even after the new government has come to power, Samir, we have not taken any concrete action to reverse it, and as a result we have lost now 2 years, because we expected the new government to come up with a major macroeconomic reform program. Even when we went for the IMF's extended fund facility, one of the prerequisites for the EFF was that Sri Lanka would introduce an economy-wide reform program in order to make the business easier and also to come out of the present economic crisis. Now, you would have noted, Samir, that when the IMF review team visited Sri Lanka about 2 weeks ago, they were not able to come to a very consensus with the Sri Lankan government official, because most of the economic reforms which the government of Sri Lanka had undertaken had not been even started. So as a result, the mission had issued a statement saying that they have not been able to come to an agreement with the Sri Lanka government officials, which means that the mission's outcome has been inconclusive. And they are going to have further discussions when the IMF and World Bank annual meetings would start. Spring meetings would start in Washington DC in April with the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Central Bank. And if they are successful in coming to an agreement at that particular one-on-one meeting to be held there, then of course we may be able to get the third tranche of the extended fund facility. Now at the present it is hanging on balance. And right now, if you look at the present situation of the country, Samir, now we got the 2016 economic growth data, which is simply 4.4%, as against the targeted growth rate of 7% announced by the Prime Minister of the country. And the foreign reserves are declining today, and out of the gross reserve that we have, the freely available reserves which we can use at any particular point of time amounts about $4.7 billion US, whereas the loan repayment commitments alone in the next 12-month period will come to about 4.8 billion US dollars. So we don't
Dr.
have...
Wijewardene, you said that since 2012, the economic pressure, the decline was seen. Let's say there was no change in regime in the year 2015. Do you think that things
Still,
would have been
it should have deteriorated further, because the previous regime, Samir, had been concentrating on domestic economy-based economic growth. They had completely ignored the relevance of export for Sri Lanka's economy, and as a result, exports had been falling. So, in other words, what had happened would have been that they had invested in infrastructure projects, which was not bringing any sizable economic benefits in the immediate term to Sri Lanka.
Do you think, Dr. Wijewardene, that Sri Lanka still needs monetary reform?
Exactly, we need money. I mean, what matters is that when we have a huge trade deficit, Samir, about 9 billion US dollars in 2016 alone. This year also it will be higher, more than that, because we are having an increase in the import bill and also slow growth. Actually, the exports are actually stagnating. So because of this reason, and also when we don't get enough foreign direct investments into Sri Lanka, there is a shortage of foreign reserves for the country to introduce all these reforms.
Do we have money to sustain ourselves in the next few months?
No,
Dr. Wijewardene?
we don't have. We don't have.
So what is option B?
Option is immediately the government will have to go for the borrowing international. Now already they have announced that they are going to borrow 2.5 billion US dollars from 1.5 by issuing international sovereign bonds, another 1 billion by way of syndicated loan. So these monies would be coming to Sri Lanka within the next 2 to 3 month period time. So at least we may be able to overcome the immediate crisis, but it doesn't mean, Samir, that we have to stop at that. What we have to do is we have to introduce these long-term economic reforms, and those reforms are not yet to be started.
Dr. Wijewardene, last year in October, I posed a question to you asking you whether Sri Lanka is bankrupt, and then your response was, we are far from it. And now you seem to be very inclined.
Now of course we are at the verge of the bankruptcy as far as how foreign loan repayments are concerned, because we don't have enough money. I mean, when we pay foreign loans, Samir, we don't have money left for us to do any other thing.
Thank you very much, Dr. W. Wijewardene, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. I now move my attention to Sriran Fernando, lead economist, Frontier Research. Sriran, last time you were on the show, you were somewhat bullish of the country's economy. You said that we can get things done. What are your thoughts now? Do you still believe that things can be done? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic like Dr. W. Wijewardene? What are your thoughts?
Well, I'm not pessimistic, and I think we're sort of past probably the deep economic crisis that Dr. Wijewardene was sort of highlighting. I think we've sort of, as a country, as people, as a common man, we've sort of bought into this negative framework of the economy, and we're in deep trouble and things like that. But you have to look at things in relative context. There are certain things which probably are not getting the due attention that are turning positive.
Like what?
So for example, on the fiscal side, there's a bit of rebalancing going on. We're collecting more revenue, the deficit sort of coming down, and when you sort of tighten on that side and raise taxes and all, it sort of limits growth as well. So the other dynamic of growth slowdown is earlier you had an expanding fiscal deficit which sort of funded this growth which was not sustainable. Now you have this curtailing of the fiscal deficits, and therefore growth also comes down in that way. So it's stabilizing in that sense. And another thing is, I think, for example, even though we had a lot of this debt coming up, borrowing costs are actually falling. And I don't think it's getting the due attention either in the media or columnists out there. For example, on the 14th, I think last week, the central bank raised this Sri Lanka development bonds, and they raised it at a cost of 2.5% above the LIBOR rate. This time last year, they raised the same one-year bond at 4.4%. a 1.8% reduction. So clearly investors are still seeing appetite for Sri Lanka debt, and we're still able to raise this and continue on. So I don't think it's all, you know, negative and doom and gloom.
Shiran, you said that government's revenue collection has improved significantly.
Yeah.
Are we taking the money from here and then dumping that money somewhere else? Where is this money? If you've seen a significant increase in revenue collection, where is that money?
It is definitely, I think there's a cutback in terms of expenditure. So you're not seeing it going, funding a lot of development, things like that, but it's keeping things going. Because we don't have a revenue, you don't even have a revenue surplus. That means our revenue that we're collecting is not even meeting the current expenditure.
But the IMF team that was here in Colombo was not that optimistic on the country's economy. They were very negative. They could not even reach a conclusion with the Sri Lankan authorities on a way forward.
Well, you could say even in November or December, when they sort of did this thing as well, they were slightly less optimistic. And then when they went back to Washington, the approvals and all that came. So I think they do understand the political realities of getting some of these reforms done. And what they're certainly keen on in terms of the fiscal side is the things to do with this new Inland Revenue Act and the taxes that are supposed to come with that. So I think they will weigh all those things up, and the tranches will continue to come.
Is the government really having its mechanisms in place to ensure the country's economy is on the right track? Do they have their cards right? Are they playing it right at the moment?
Well, they're not communicating the right cards, but I think overall the strategy, as Dr. Wijewardene said, is more now towards export. And that's the only way to get out of this.
But Dr. Wijewardene was saying that exports have stagnated. He did not refer to as exports.
But at least there's a strategy towards, at least a 2020, 2022 strategy towards, you know, picking these exports
But the problem is, can we survive up until 2020 or 2022?
We can. I mean, that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years. We've gone out every year and raised $1.5 billion from capital markets, kept it rolling over. And that's essentially the future strategy until we get these exports and FDI to kick in.
Many investment forums have been taking place in Sri Lanka subsequent to the 8th of January 2015 polls. So you see many forums taking place. But have these forums created any value? Has it brought in investments in simple terms?
It's yet to see probably the hard dollars coming in and setting up stuff. But I think in terms of exposure, in terms of sometimes telling some of the finer details of Sri Lanka and getting that message across, it definitely has. I think for it to sort of capitalize, maybe you sort of need to improve governance and the whole bureaucracy within getting investments from, you know, advertising it to actually coming through. But definitely,
is the
I think
really signaling the right way forward for the country. Has the right signals been put in place at the moment as far as investments are concerned?
not as yet. I think a lot of things are
Then why have
still up in
investment
the air.
forums if they have not got their act together?
You still need to generate that buzz even if things aren't going too well or you're not setting the priorities right. You still need to get the message across. You need
But
these
the
foreign
investors are not going to be investing in a country just because an investment forum is held, Shiran. Sure not.
Well, they don't always think of it in terms of the next 6 months, next year. They will think, okay, they'll think of 5-year plan. Sri Lanka as a destination may change. They'll use Sri Lanka to pivot to other countries. Maybe in the next 6 months that strategy is not really working. So it's a very long-term thing, but you need to put that idea into the minds of the investors that, hey, Sri Lanka is here, this is what we offer, and they'll remember it.
Would you invest in the stock market in Sri Lanka?
Right now, probably. On a personal level, I think maybe, I mean, certain stocks look attractive and valuations are attractive.
So let's ask the man himself, Dhanushka Samarasinghe, head of research at SoftLogic, the group, SoftLogic Group, SoftLogic Stockbrokers. Sorry, Dhanushka. Dhanushka, things don't look that bullish as far as the stock market is concerned. You speak to a stockbroker, they say, oh no, we are in a soup right now. You ask another stockbroker, they say, we are standing on a ledge, and you have another stockbroker, they say we are in a limbo. What are your thoughts?
Samir, the problem with the stock market is it's a lead indicator of the economy, and more than the economy, it is a reflection of the sentiment. So what has happened is the sentiment is weakened. It is weakened because of the expectation versus delivery situation. With the new government coming into power in 2015, there was a buzz created, and there was a lot of expectations, but the delivery was not up to that level, or we did not satisfy the expectations. So that, I think, is the main concern with regard to the dwindling sentiment. And then taking from what Dr. Wijewardena and Shreyan was mentioning on the economic front, there was a lot of hope that sort of shock therapy in terms of reforms would take place. But the hard reality, I think, is that when you are facing a coalition government and you have to face the political pressures, it is not easy as said. So we are back to square one. We are trying to balance the economy. So
you say that the stock market is a lead indicator as far as the country's economy is concerned, because it projects the sentiments of the investors. What do the investors want right now? What changes do they envisage?
If you take the investors per se, you can break the thinking into different segments. You have the institutional, more sophisticated investors, you have the foreign investors, then you have the retail investors. So in a developing market like ours, I think we have to take a meaningful take back. We have to think of the thinking behind the foreign and institutional investors. They would want economic reforms, yes, but more than that, they would want a clear policy directive, not back and forth policy implementation.
So you mean to say that there's inconsistent policy leading to this problematic situation as far as the country's economy is concerned?
There were positives, but those positives
have been overridden by the negatives.
Basically erased off because of inconsistencies.
The basic objective of a stock market is to create an attractive, safe, competitive, transparent and a credible investment environment. Basically, that is the objective of any stock market. In Sri Lanka, do you see an attractive, safe, competitive, transparent and a credible environment to invest?
The stock market per se, Samir, I think there is. In relative terms, if you are comparing Sri Lanka to other frontier markets, which we are classified as, we are way up there. We are almost in the verge of becoming an emerging market apart from our liquidity concerns. In terms of transparency, in terms of governance, we are way up there. But the issue is, it's only 1/3 of the economy which is reflected in the stock market. Market capitalization is only around just shy of $20 billion, whereas our GDP is touching 80, so actually 1/4.
So what are you looking at the end of the day, Dhanushka? Because people who are at the low end invest in the stock market, and every one of them over the last 2 years have been saying that they have not been able to make money. Why?
So
who is making money at the end of the day? If this is the case, you are saying that Sri Lankan stock market is good, they are doing well, but the majority of the players in the stock market say we've lost money.
Somewhere the problem is the way they look at it. It's an investment at the end of the day. So if you are looking at short term, when I say short term, 12-month horizon, no, that is not the way to look at it. It's a developing country. It's an emerging market.
What's the time frame you're looking at?
We should look at somewhere around 3 years. 3 to 5 years is the horizon, right? If somebody buys a property, he doesn't try to flip it within a year. So it's similar to such an investment.
I have seen people who have invested in the stock market 3 to 5 years ago buying stocks of blue chip companies at 1,100 or so, and now 5 years down the line it has dropped to 400, and now you say it's a long-term investment.
If you go a bit further back, right, rather than limiting to say 4 or 5 years, if you look back 7 years, the story changes.
But
So
story
it's-
changed because there was a bubble in stock market, and you're well aware of it.
2012 was the bubble. 2012 was the bubble. So obviously, the guys who bought, any investor who bought at the peak, will be now suffering. It is still they could not recoup their investment, because that is the issue, because they had bought at the peak. So now still the market hasn't really entered the recovery phase. It is bottoming out. As Sriyan said, I mean, now we are seeing significantly attractive valuations. That is why we are seeing foreign money coming into the market. So it is another indicator, because in the market, in the Sri Lankan market, what had happened is the foreigners have been buying in when the market valuations are depressed, whereas all the local institutions or the local retailers have been exiting. So they have been buying at the low, selling at the peak. That is what happened in 2010 and 11. The foreigners exited,
Is stock
locals
market
entered.
the right place to invest now?
I think it is one avenue to invest now if you have a long-term view. When I say long-term, at least have 3-year view.
And you guarantee the people's money.
I can't guarantee anything, but that is the expectation.
That's fine, Dhanushka.
Right.
I don't want to hold Dhanushka accountable. If you at home lose your money by investing in the stock market, be wise. The stock market is not doing that great at the moment. Most company shares have fallen drastically year on year in the stock market. So if you're investing, you have to be watchful. So on to my right is Nabil Majid joining us as always. On to my immediate left is Chaturanga Hapurachi. Incidentally, he's celebrating his 30th birthday here. I'm just kidding.
Wrong date, wrong year.
23rd.
23rd.
23rd. There you go. He's 23 today. Nice to have you on board, Chaturanga. All joining us this evening is Charita Fernando. Thank you very much, Charita, for joining us this evening. So let's open the floor. Let's start off with the lady. Charita, it's all yours.
Thanks, Shyam. My first question is to Dr. Wijewardena. We've seen articles by Professor Razin Sali about 3 probable scenarios: drift, takeoff, and relapse. So it's obvious that we haven't taken off. The economy is stagnant. So are we still in the drift mode, or are we heading towards a relapse?
I think the analysis made by Professor Razin Sali very clearly says that we are moving towards relapse now, because we had been drifting for 2 years, Charita, because what we mean by drifting is that without taking any concrete policy measure in order to correct the macroeconomic ailments from which the country had been suffering for a long period of time, we were just drifting. And the drifting period is now, it appears it's now over, and now we are about to relapse now. That is the danger that we are facing, and Professor Razin Sali had in fact drawn the attention of the policymakers of the country to the possible risk, and he had urged them to take immediate measures to come out of the present crisis.
When you compare the current situation where people feel, frustrated, they feel that the government is dysfunctional, incompetent, and when you tend to compare the two regimes, you can hear some business people, the business community saying at least things moved faster during the previous regime. The pace of things were not stagnant. Big projects moved. Do you agree with that?
Well, what has happened is, Charita, it's true that the previous regime had started a large number of large infrastructure projects, and I might say that some of the problems which we are facing today are mainly due to those projects. For example, there are about 10 large infrastructure projects which they had started. They are not paying anything. They are not actually making any money for Sri Lanka, and most of these projects have to be now maintained and also kept up at the expense of the taxpayers. Therefore, a large segment of the government's revenue is now being spent on maintaining those unproductive infrastructure projects, and it has become a problem for the present government to come up with a very productive and effective business plan to make them working again, and what has happened is that that particular business plan has not been presented so far. So if they come up with the business plan, probably we may be able to make a turnaround in those infrastructure projects. So people might have seen those projects, but they have not seen the fact that the projects were all a waste of resources of the country.
Shiran, the government was aiming to attract $5 billion US dollars in foreign direct investments within the next couple of years. How has Sri Lanka progressed in that area? As Shami said, we see a lot of forums in Colombo, overseas. Currently the stock market is in Australia, I understand.
Yes.
Yeah, so how have we progressed since 8th of January?
The progress has been very poor, I would say. Very, if you look at even the 2014 and 13 numbers compared to now, haven't done too well. So I think even if you look even post the civil conflict and what happened after that, a lot of people were expecting a huge increase in FDI, but you didn't see it. It was still $1 billion. Right now it's even under $1 billion. So what that shows you is that we are not, the certain infrastructure or the institutions are not ready enough to handle this level of FDI coming in. So it's A, an institutional problem, and B, also policy uncertainty issue. So if you don't clear up the taxes, things like that, and issues to do with land, incentive structures, whether these things will be changed overnight, whether it will change from regime to regime, because these investors take long-term views. So you're not really seeing investors coming in, and a lot of the FDI that is coming into the real estate sector, and you're not seeing too much into some of the hard, maybe export-oriented sectors. So clearly, I think the government has acknowledged that, and I think certain policymakers are not shying away, saying that it's actually really bad, and maybe this year probably we could turn it around, but we need that change in sentiment.
Shiran, now when you look at, we were talking about the foreign direct investment that is coming into the country, but if you take a look at all these delegations, political delegations that come into the country, we saw a few Canadian MPs in the country in the past week. We now know that a Chinese delegation is in the country. All these delegations seem to have a positive outlook on the economy of Sri Lanka. What indicators are they looking at, and why is it that the Sri Lankans say it's always negative when it might be positive, but the foreign delegations have a very positive outlook altogether?
I think since we're in this environment and in this mindset, we are bogged down by the negativity. When you hear economic crisis, that's what we think. And everyone's thinking, okay.
But when you say crisis, that's what it means. You are in a crisis.
Yeah,
you can't have a positive crisis.
Everyone is bogged out in that, and they sort of see a narrow, short-term framework where they can't get out of it. But these guys, they come in with a fresh approach. They see things like the location, the strategic play, the untapped potential in some provinces, some of the labor force dynamics, certain things that we are not seeing it, we're sort of overlooking because we're seeing all this negativity. So I think they see the long-term picture and things like that. What they're looking for is these incentive structures and policies being in place. I think the interest will continue to come. There's no doubt, because we are well positioned. I mean, we can sell the story over and over again to the same guys, but we need the guys to start investing.
Dr. Wijewardena,
we've been selling that story over and over again for some time now, and it doesn't seem to be working. Foreign direct investment seems to be leaving the country. I remember on New Year's Day this year, there was a report in the newspapers. I can't recall which one. It was on Ceylon Today. There's a report in the newspapers about problems at the Katunayake Free Trade Zone, about companies in the free trade zone, manufacturing companies in the free trade zone, having to close doors because of various problems that they were facing. So, in spite of what you say about us telling the story over and over and over again, it seems that no one's buying it.
Well, you can't say that no one's buying it. You still have people coming in and taking out the investments and things like that.
Taking out the investments or investing in Sri Lanka?
Bringing
Bringing
certain
in.
investors coming out, going in. I mean, that's the normal thing. I mean, it depends where you are based as well. If your domestic country is not doing too well, you need to take out your investments. And that's nothing to do with Sri Lanka in certain times. But I agree with you. I mean, there are these issues, these practical issues that are not being solved, which need to sort of, the government needs to get the ball rolling on these things.
The finance minister said at a recent forum last week in Hong Kong, he had said that the government is planning on embarking on several strategic IPOs of state-owned enterprises. The report that quoted him mentioned a hotel in Colombo, 2 hotels in Colombo actually, 3 hotels in Colombo, I beg your pardon, and several other enterprises, unnamed enterprises. And he'd also talked about the securitizing of government assets to the tune of billions of dollars through a special purpose vehicle. Do you think these measures will help to address the, let's not call it a crisis, let's call it the situation that we are in?
Well, what he said is not something new. 2 budgets have actually said that. So it's not something that he's suddenly come up with. It's about the implementation of those, because a lot of these investors are looking for it. For example, if these certain hotels are put to the market or listed in the market, it helps liquidity. The foreigners will come in as a positive signal that the government is serious about this, and it will also help government revenue. So we can avert, always having to go and
But then
issue bonds and
you're
things like
acting
that.
on the assumption that these IPOs will generate significant interest. It could also go the other way.
It could, if the measures aren't put in properly.
Because we were talking about people not buying the story.
Yeah. So that's why I think that's what the delay has been there for a long time. So I think they will lose credibility if they continue to say this and you don't see the steps being taken to sort of list some of these things.
Dhanushka, I want your thoughts on this. You think that those strategic IPOs by the government will have a significant impact in correcting the situation?
See, it might not be significant, but it will give an indication in the right direction. What the government has been talking for the past 1.5 years or almost 2 years is that they want to list or sell out the non-strategic state-owned enterprises. So the word non-strategic means it's not strategically important for the government to be running it. So yes, government getting hands off all those investments and putting it to the market, it's a very positive signal. Not only because it will improve the short-term or immediate market liquidity position, or it might attract portfolio investors. Right? We have to differentiate between the foreign direct investments and portfolio investments. So we might attract short-term portfolio funds to the country to gobble up these IPOs. But more than that, what the government would achieve by doing this is that they would wash off their hands of managing a recurrent operation, which is
But
not...
every single time, Dhanushka, the government has been trying to do something, they failed. Let's look at the Hambantota Port project that they were looking at. Let's take a look at the 15,000 acre plot of land that they were looking at. Let's talk about bringing down Volkswagen, which was an utter failure. And then looking at bringing down the tire company, which was initially said as an Italian tire company. What went wrong? Everything seems not in favor of the government. They're doing something wrong. What is it that they're doing wrong?
I think I can only give my opinion or as an observer out there. Samir, I think there is a clear issue with regard to communication from the government to the public, and also there is this political headwinds, because we have to understand it is a coalition government and political survival might come first over economic reforms. So I think it's more also a balancing act from a layman's point of view, because I can't speak on behalf of the government or any policy maker.
But you can definitely speak on behalf of the private sector of Sri Lanka.
Yes, so on what we can see is that yes, it is more of a government is trying to do a balancing act. It's not that the government, the current government, does not have the will to continue or start off a policy reform exercise. It's just that they have not been able to really implement those policy changes what they really wanted to do. So that is again bringing us back to that issue with weakening sentiment, because the expectation was those policy reforms, economic reforms would happen.
Dr. Wijewardena, we were talking also about the other factor, not just the IPOs. The finance minister also mentioned about securitizing government assets and through a special purpose vehicle. This would fly over the head of most viewers. I'm not an economics expert, but what I understand from that is basically bonds. They're going to raise money through bonds. Special purpose vehicle. What does he mean by a special purpose?
No, what it means is that instead of selling the assets of the government in the stock exchange, the government would create a special purpose vehicle which would be managed by some outside agency.
What is this special purpose
That
vehicle?
is, it's
What could it be?
It's a new outfit which should be managed completely independent of the government. So it will be probably maybe an international bank, and the assets would be handed over to the special purpose vehicle, and they will sell the assets from the special purpose vehicle, and the money that would be raised would be kept in the special purpose vehicle, and they would reinvest them in the government securities. So that's what is going to happen, and as Danushka has said, it's a good move, because the government would be moving away from doing small type businesses, and it would be concentrating on doing only strategically important businesses in the country. So this is a new method of divesting the ownership of the state sector enterprises, which would free the hands of the government to do the more important
But
work.
how, when you consider, Danushka is also talking about, so we're also talking about political headwinds. When you consider the sort of sentiment among the masses at present, how successful do you think the government can be?
No, a government
with
can be
these two
successful, Nadeem. Now, there's no question. I mean, it's true that it's a coalition government, but simply because it's a coalition government doesn't mean that the government cannot introduce these reforms. Because we have an example in the David Cameron administration in the United Kingdom. They formed a coalition government, and there were two opposing political parties, Conservatives and the Social Democrats. And but of course, David Cameron was able to introduce the most painful economic reforms in that country, because it's a matter of communication and reaching an agreement among the coalition
I'm
parties.
not sure how successful that was, because a few years later Britain left the European Union.
No, that's a different issue, because you can.
You're
would
sure
have
that
noted
Cameron's economic reforms had
it's a
nothing to
reform.
do with the
Reform was
Brexit?
successful, Nadeem, in the sense that a country which had a chronic budget deficit, the deficit was converted to surplus. The UK was able to buy its foreign debt.
But many poor working class people felt that it was done at
That's,
their
of course,
expense, and therefore
it's
they
very
voted
painful.
to
I mean,
leave the European
when
Union.
you conduct this kind of economic reforms, Nadeem, it's a very painful exercise. That painful exercise has to be managed properly.
This therein lies my question. Maybe we need a sociologist on the panel as well. But there lies my question. How successful will the government be through
The
this?
government can do it, probably, if it can.
Will it be like signing a political, death notice?
Yeah, but of course, you have two major political parties, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party and the United National Party, now in one unity government. Most important requirement for the unity government to conduct these reforms, Nadeem, they have to come to an agreement first. So what was missing was that there was no such agreement.
Dr. Wijewardena, taking a look at policy decisions and economic reforms, the latest that we saw was the Minister of Finance coming forward and signing statements of corporate intent with various state-owned corporations in the petroleum, aviation, port sectors. So what does the statement of corporate intent mean, and what does it mean for the country as a whole?
No, it's actually just like signing a memorandum of understanding, Chaturanga, where he would be requiring all these state-owned corporations to enterprises to perform according to a certain criteria which would be prescribed by the Ministry of Finance. But we all know that even though we signed those MOUs with various other parties, unless those MOUs are monitored very closely by the people who have introduced them, what happens is after a period of time people tend to forget about them. So I don't know whether the Ministry of Finance has introduced a suitable mechanism within the ministry to monitor it.
So does the IMF and the GSP Plus have to do anything with this?
No, there's nothing to do, because this is a part, of course, it has something to do with the IMF, because IMF wanted the government of Sri Lanka to go into state-owned enterprise reforms. So instead of going into this major reform work that they were expected to do, they are just trying to sign an MOU with the management of the particular enterprises. The management in the sense, the chairman of the enterprise and the secretary
of the ministry
in charge of that particular enterprise, and hold them responsible for making a turnaround in the particular enterprise.
But if they couldn't do it while they were
there's no penalty. That's the thing. There's no penalty, and also, I mean, if there's a suitable mechanism to follow up within the Ministry of Finance, then of course we know the progress.
Just the statement of corporate intent would not be enough.
Exactly, it's just an MOU, the normal MOUs that we sign with other parties.
Thank you, Doctor.
Danushka, you mentioned earlier that there is a problem in communicating policy. What is your advice to the government? I mean, what would you like to see the government doing to tackle this issue?
On behalf of the private sector, Charita, what I can say is if the government can be first decide amongst themselves, and that final decision only to be communicated to the public, and once communicated, or once it is gazetted or it is made law, they should not go back on it due to whatever pressures which are coming. So I mean, I don't know about Dr. Wijewardene and Shriyan, but the first budget, right, which this government introduced, there was the concern or the issue of the super gains tax, right? If the government had consulted the relevant corporates which were netted into that super gains tax beforehand and explained the scenario and went ahead with it, the outcome would have been different. The negative sentiment would not have been this strong. And then another interesting fact was in that first budget, which I personally liked, was the finance minister sort of basically cancelled all the vehicle permits. It was just mentioned in the budget, but everything was taken back. The amount of money involved would have been not that significant in relative terms, but the message, if it had continued or if it had gone through, the message would have been a huge motivator, because the government was trying to curtail recurrent expenditure of the government, which would have addressed or which would have helped us to come out of this vicious cycle, because we are trying to enforce fiscal discipline. If we are going to narrow our fiscal deficit, as Shriyan said, we have to increase our taxes. When tax rates are increased, I mean, easiest way would be tax rates to be increased. When the tax rates are increased, the people are not happy, right? Then the other, because the cost of all the goods would be going up, right? So then if with all that, inflationary pressures come in. To tackle inflationary pressure, what you have to do is you have to jack up the rates, right? If you don't jack up the rates, the currency would devalue. So it's again a balancing act. But if instead of trying to sort of mix about within this interest rate, inflation, currency, if the policymakers can take a hard view on their expenditure, not the capital expenditure, the recurrent expenditure side. That is a significant move in removing or taking us out of this vicious cycle. So things like that, if the government or
you
policy...
say that it's going to be enough to take us out of the vicious cycle. Does that mean that a few years from now that the government also would lose their job, those in power now?
No, Samir, what I'm telling is, I mean, we have seen this scenario. I mean, I can only speak for 80s onwards, right? We have seen the same scenario happening. It's a managing or a balancing act.
So you're saying the balancing act alone won't do?
We will continue to survive, and we will continue to grow as a outlier.
Brave enough to take the hit at the end of the day?
I think this coalition government, as Dr. Wijewardena said, had a very good opportunity of doing it. But I think the time is running out.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts in the first and second round. The time is running out. We're going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we speak more on the state of the country's economy. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation.